This next poem is Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney, written in 1966, which is, as its title suggests, about the force of a destructive storm and the island community confronted by this storm. In a way, it's a little like the Prelude, in that it also conveys the sheer power of nature as the eternal victor over mankind. And this poem can be interpreted literally and taken at face value, or you can choose to read deeper into it. See it even, perhaps, as an extended metaphor for the troubles in Ireland, which we'll look at. Let's read the poem and discuss its overview, then we'll review its context before annotating it, and finally we'll think about which other poems you could compare it to in the anthology. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so, as you see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost, nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale, so that you listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs, but no. When it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. We just sit tight while wind dives and strays invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded with the empty air. Strange. It is a huge nothing that we fear. So what's the plot of this poem? It begins with the narrator who is part of a community that thinks it is well prepared for a coming storm. As the poem goes on, however, their confidence starts to waver as the storm grows stronger. The sounds of the storm are described and the magnitude of its power is demonstrated. By the end, the poem describes the fear of this community as the storm hits the island. No matter how well prepared they thought they were, they're no match against the storm. Seamus Heaney was a wonderful poet and one of the major poets of the 20th and 21st century. He died in 2013. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. And Seamus Heaney, as you can probably hear from his name, was Irish, which is central to his identity as a poet because many of his poems revolve around Ireland. And as such, since he lived through what is known as the Troubles in Ireland, he often reflects them in his work. If you're not sure what is meant by the Troubles, it refers to a conflict in Northern Ireland which began in the 1960s, when the Catholic population, who were the minority, began challenging the discrimination they faced from the Protestant majority. By the 1970s, some Irish nationalist groups, the most well-known being the IRA, were using violent means to force the UK government to make that area independent of the UK. British troops became a regular everyday presence on the streets of Belfast. Initially, they were there to protect the Catholics from Protestant violence. But before long, they became symbols of an unwanted army occupation, and violent clashes between the protesters and the police and the army were common. Now, why is this relevant to the poem? Some might choose not to engage with this contextual backdrop, because the poem can be interpreted at its surface level as being about nature and about a storm. However, Heaney, who was a very clever poet, could be alluding to it in the title. If you take storm on the island, if you take storm on and the first letter of the, it spells stormont. And stormont are the Parliament buildings in Northern Ireland. Was this intentional? Most likely. And therefore, this poem could be approached as an extended metaphor for the turbulent political storm hanging over Ireland during the Troubles. But the beauty of literature is that it is subject to interpretation, and different people take different things from literature. So whether or not you agree with that interpretation is up to you. Just remember in your analysis to use what we call hedging language, tentative language. So rather than stating, oh, this is a metaphor, you would say, this perhaps could be interpreted as a metaphor for the Troubles in Ireland. Let's take a closer look at the poem. First, let's look at the title. So, as I said, storm on t. That does spell stormont, which are the Parliament buildings in Northern Ireland. As I said, this is most likely intentional by Heaney, and you can choose how much or not you read into that. notice the lack of article. It's not a storm on the island or the storm on the island. And it suggests it's quite a frequent occurrence, these storms, as we'll see in the poem as well. And then island, could he be referring, because obviously it sounds the same as the country island, but there are several hundred islands off the coast of Ireland as well, with very small populations, so that also could be what the poem is about. And we open with this first statement, "We are prepared," broken off from the rest of the line by the colon that follows. This first person plural, we, immediately establishes a sense of community. Throughout, there is a theme of community versus isolation, as you'll see. And they seem confident in their preparations. But could that be a false sense of confidence? Could it be actually that they are complacent about the nature, about the weather? And actually there's quite a lot of complacency. We build our houses, squat, sink walls in rock. Clearly then, from the way that they build their houses, storms are a frequent thing, as we said about the title. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay. So as you see, there are no stacks or sticks that could be lost. So because the earth has never, because it's quite a rocky area, the earth has never given them hay, but also that means that there are no stacks or sticks that can be lost. There's no way to measure the damage of the storm. And from here, actually, there is a shift in tone towards fear. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows. So actually, there could be sometimes comfort to be found in nature. There's quite a lot that draws our attention to this word when it blows full blast, because there is enjambment in that it's flown over from the last line. It is directly followed by a caesura, a break in the line of poetry, because you have that colon. And then obviously blast is a word that is similar to the noise it refers to. So it's an example of onomatopoeia. So as usual, it's not enough just to spot all of these things, because there's a number of things there. That you have onomatopoeia, you have the fact that it's followed by caesura. There's a lot to draw attention to this word blast, but why? What is the effect of this word? Well, it conveys the force of the storm and the fact that it's a surprise and element of surprise. You know what I mean. That's not the first time he's used the second person. Earlier, here we have, so as you see, we have this direct address. So the speaker is directly addressing with the second person, you. That direct address, it builds on the sense of community. But also, if it is about Ireland and it is about the Irish, then of course they know what he means, because they've suffered these storms all together. Raise a tragic chorus. So again, that reminder of community, but also a tragic chorus that happens in Greek tragedy. It then hints at catastrophe, because obviously tragedy always ends in the downfall of the hero. So could that hint at the catastrophe coming? But there's not the trees to do this. There's not the trees to have the leaves and branches raising a tragic chorus so that you listen to the thing you fear more second person, forgetting that it pummels your house too. And although there's not these things, by using the second person, he makes it universal and relatable to everybody. But the point is, there's not this distraction, because there are no trees, no natural shelter. So actually, there's not even the distraction of listening to this tragic chorus in a gale. They don't have that, because there is no trees, there's no shelter. You might think that the sea is company. There is an implicit message here that you must respect the sea. Anyone who's lived near the sea knows the sheer colossal force that the sea can have, that the sea is not something to be taken lightly, that the sea can turn, it's unpredictable, and there can be storms that have really severe consequences. An odd coupling of words there, exploding comfortably, because you wouldn't associate explosions with being comfortable. And yet that's showing that the sea is in its natural habitat, the sea is in its natural place, its natural state, that the sea is meant to explode on the cliffs. It's doing what it's meant to do. But no, when it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. Describing the sea as this way, and this simile conveys the unexpected element, because a tame cat that's been domesticated, you wouldn't expect it to attack, just as one would be shocked by a domesticated cat that we have tamed. And maybe this is also a reflection that we can't tame the sea. That's not something that is meant to be domesticated, that the sea isn't something that is meant to be tamed. Strave means to attack repeatedly with bombs or guns. A salvo is when a number of weapons are fired in quick succession, and then you have that verb bombarded. What do you notice about those? It's very militaristic language, to do with the military, to do with the army. And what does that do? That depicts the storm as an attack. There's something much more deliberate about it, being at war, being at conflict with this storm. Invisibly an empty air, that this attack is by stealth. Again, they weren't expecting it. And to be bombarded with empty air, it seems contradictory because you think, oh, well, empty air means nothing, which we'll come to in a second. But actually, the storm turns something, even air itself, into a weapon. And this wonderful final line, strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. First of all, we'll talk about this a bit more, but the whole poem is in iambic pentameter, which is when you put the stress on the second syllable. But no, when it begins, the flung spray hits, the very window splits like a tame cat. Here, though, strange it. The first syllable has the stress. So even if you don't realise it when you're reading it aloud, strange really stands out to us. And obviously with the comma that follows it. So this unusual nature of man's relationship with this storm. So that strange alludes to a quality we can't understand. It is a huge nothing that we fear. It's incredibly ambiguous because it can have multiple interpretations. First of all, even to quantify a huge nothing, that's a contradiction in terms. Nothing is nothing. You can't have a big nothing or a small nothing. It's just nothing. So how can you quantify nothing? But also, what does that nothing mean? Is it that the storm is invisible? Does a huge nothing mean that they fear oblivion, an abyss, a void? Or is it belittling it? Is it saying that actually it's nothing that we fear, that we shouldn't be so afraid? As I said, it's a very ambiguous line to end the poem on and raises lots of questions because what is this huge nothing that they fear? If we do interpret it as an extended metaphor for the Troubles, and that the storm is the political storm in Ireland, that huge nothing, is it that all the fighting will destroy everything, there'll be complete annihilation? That could be one interpretation. We're going to talk a bit about the structure now. I do want you to notice, though, how many caesuras there are, because there are lots of caesuras, lots of breaks halfway through the line. And so those caesuras, those breaks in the line of poetry, what do? They mirror the unpredictability of the storm. And finally, I'm going to leave you with this question. Is it a literal storm, the whole poem, or is it an extended metaphor for the Troubles? That would completely alter the message of the poem, but that hint in the title means we can't completely exclude this as a possibility, that it might take on a deeper meaning, that it's more relevant to the Troubles that plagued Seamus Heaney's country. But whether or not you agree with that interpretation is up to you. In terms of its form, this poem is a solid block and therefore could represent the storm as a single event. Its 19 lines don't rhyme, although it ends with half-rhyming couplets, and it's in iambic pentameter, so 10 syllables per line, de-dum, 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 de-dum. Since it's in iambic pentameter but it doesn't rhyme, it's what we call blank verse. And this, the lack of rhyme and the iambic pentameter, it helps mirror the pattern of natural speech, so that the reader or listener feels like the speaker is talking directly to them, reinforced by the second person you used throughout the poem. This overall helps us empathise more with the community in the poem. So in terms of comparisons, you could compare this poem to Exposure because both present nature, in particular the weather, as a hostile force against which humans are somewhat helpless. But one is from the perspective of a soldier during wartime, and the other from a community who faces a storm together, obviously. You could compare it to the Prelude, because both present nature as a powerful force to be reckoned with. In Storm on the Island, however, we're showing the physical force of a storm, whereas the power nature wields over the speaker in the Prelude is more psychological. You could compare it to Ozymandias, because both poems highlight the superiority of the power of nature over the power of man. However, the message in Ozymandias is that humans can have a somewhat delusional perception of their own power because it never lasts, whereas Storm on the Island highlights the human struggle against nature and shows how no community is completely safe from natural catastrophe, no matter how well prepared they are. There you have it. I hope this makes you feel better equipped to write about this poem. And what do you think? Is this poem meant to be interpreted literally, that it's about a straight storm? Or do you think there's a metaphor in there for the political storm that made Seamus Heaney's country so turbulent during that time? As I said, that's the beauty of literature, that it is open to interpretation.